Hey, I'm Noah, and this is Sounds Good, a how-to podcast offering you a behind-the-scenes look at all the cool stuff that I get to make as an audio producer. This episode is entitled Schützenfest Collab, and it should be a fun one. I'm in the midst of wrapping up some stems that I'm doing for the rapper HILLE, and I'm going to take this opportunity to walk you through my process for collaborating with another musician who's doing the bulk of the heavy lifting on the production side of things. I have a love-hate relationship with this sort of work because on the one hand, I'm a bit of a control freak when it comes to anything musical that's going to have my name on it, but on the other hand, if I only ever worked on things that were mine and mine alone from start to finish, that would severely limit my creative output. So I find myself having to suck it up and play well with others from time to time. This kind of work ends up being a good exercise for me in listening to another producer's work, putting myself in their shoes, thinking about the project in terms of what I would want from a collaborator if I were the mastermind behind the final product, and then serving as that collaborator. I'll get into the details of precisely how I do that in just a moment, but first let me tell you the story of how I started making music with HILLE. About 3 weeks after I graduated college, I moved to India to teach strings at the Gandhi Ashram School in Kalimpong, West Bengal. I might get into that in greater detail on another episode, but for now, the important thing is that I introduce you to Louisa, who was a German volunteer who was working at the same school. We were approaching the end of my 1-year visa that I was on to teach music at this school, and I had a job lined up that was going to start in September, but I had 3 months in which I was not going to be employed, and it's a really bad idea to overstay a visa in India. It's also a really bad idea to move to the US and not have a job lined up. It is very expensive here just to live. So I was scrambling. I was looking for something that I would be able to do. And fortunately for me, Louisa grew up on a farm in Germany, and the potato harvest was approaching, so there was plenty of work to be had there. So Louisa's family took me in and gave me some work, and that was how I came to be living in Germany in 2014 in the summer when not only did the German national football team win the World Cup, that was a very exciting thing to be around for, but it was also Schützenfest season. Schützenfest it translates to Shooter Fest. It's sort of like Oktoberfest, but it's more common in the central and northern parts of the country. And basically these shooting clubs put on big parties that the entire community comes out to partake in. So that was where I was when I met my friend Martin, who is also known as HILLE, the rapper and producer. So over a couple of beers, I learned from Martin that he was a musician, and we agreed that we would get together and play some music at some point. So a couple weeks after Schützenfest ended, I went over to his place. We recorded a little bit. We talked about music. We really hit it off. And then not long after that, I left the country and moved back to the US. But Martin and I stayed in touch. And so when the pandemic hit and I was doing a lot less live performance and a lot more recording and producing and composing, it was perfect timing for us to start sending tracks back and forth. Now, recently, Martin has released some of the things that we worked on together. So I've been able to kind of reverse engineer his process, which allows me to make tracks that are more useful for him and also to save a little bit of time on my end by cutting out the things in my process that Martin doesn't end up using. So what's my actual task here? In this scenario, I'm not really co-producing with HILLE, and it's best if I don't think that I am. He's sending me stuff that's 80%, maybe even 90% finished. All the bones are there. So if I start trying to add new bones, this thing's going to end up with 11 fingers or a random prehensile tail, which in this case would not be cool. Nobody wants that. Since Martin's not really looking for new bones, I can focus on either outlining ideas he has already present in the piece and amplifying those ideas, or reinterpreting something that's there in new context. Even this process of amplifying pre-existing musical ideas or having a conversation with these ideas that results in a new way of thinking about them doesn't require me personally, though. Anybody could pop these sequences of pitch and duration into a halfway decent strings plugin and get something listenable out. The thing that I'm able to bring to this production, that really any strings player would be able to bring, is that little sheen of humanity. The minor intonation issues that are like almost imperceptible, but you can still tell, especially if you're listening closely. That little bit of humanness, even the most skilled sample library player won't be able to bring out. And for audiences who are used to listening to really sample-intensive hip-hop, getting more than 8 bars out of a violinist is sort of a novel thing. I am by no means an excellent violinist, but in this case, that can be a bit of a strength because these small intonation issues, these small imperfections, they don't hurt. And if anything, I think they bring a little bit more richness to the production. Anyway, let's get into the process. Martin sent me 5 pieces to add some violin to. As I said, the pieces are mostly done, so I don't need to build huge structures on top of them. Just sprinkle in a little bit of ear candy here and there. First, I've got to have a listen and take a few notes. I need to know the tempo, which Martin sent, and the key, which I can figure out by plucking out some scale fragments as I listen. When it comes to the lyrical content, ich spreche nicht so gut Deutsch. Ich habe keine Ahnung, was das heißt. So really, I just try and get the vibe of the music to determine what is appropriate to play. It's fairly obvious for the most part. That said, if I'm getting myself into trouble here by, I don't know what Martin's writing, so please let me know in the comments if I need to be a little more careful. Next, I've got to set each piece up in the DAW with the correct tempos so that Logic doesn't do anything weird and give me a track that won't lock in with the grid in Martin's original file. And at this point, I'm ready to either play around a bit and see what comes out, or I might find I need to warm up with some scales and some etudes just so that I don't embarrass myself. If I am ready, though, I can start recording and see what happens. There was a time in my life in which I would agonize over sketching out ideas in musical notation. I would spend hours in middle school putting together notation that I could bring to school to have my school orchestra perform. By and large, I don't do much composing with notation at this point, unless I'm getting it from MIDI data that I've exported from the DAW, just because my composition is pretty improvisatory and based on banging things together in the moment, copying and pasting and moving things around as a means of orchestrating and arranging. I find it to be a bit more tactile, sort of like playing with Legos instead of drawing, maybe. I don't know if that's a good comparison, but all of this is to say that I'm improvising these parts and maybe keeping a few things from take to take as I hear ideas that I like, but I'm not really writing anything out. As I've already said, my playing at the moment is not that great. I'm hoping to change this over the coming months as I rebuild a regular practice habit. But for now, it's okay because these tracks are not about virtuosic playing. They are about putting something purpose-built and human into a piece of music that would otherwise be a little bit modular and really sample heavy. That said, the thing that makes these tracks extra useful for Martin is that they have, they're not 8-bar samples, but they do have a certain modularity to them because I'm playing over music that is otherwise modular. So Martin has a lot of freedom with these tracks. He can move them all over the place. They'll be locked to the grid. They'll be of the same chord progression. They'll be in the right key. He can soak them in reverb and put them sort of at the margins of the audience's attention, or he can bring them out. He can chop them up, layer them on top of each other. Lots and lots of possibility with this type of thing that I'm sending him. When I sent my first batch of ideas his way, he responded that he was going to rewrite some of the lyrics. And so in that way, we're kind of having something of a conversation. We're not co-producers, but we are engaging in a musical dialogue. Keeping all of that in mind, and this is what I picked up by listening to the final products, I think of what I send him as stems. I sort of see my ideas through to their logical conclusion, or at least to my interpretation of their logical conclusion. But I try to give Martin the most wieldy material I can give him. More specifically, I'll send a few violin tracks in harmony with one another. I will pan them, I'll compress them, I'll treat them with reverb to my taste, but I'll also send them with the effects bypassed. If I'm recording with a few different mic positions, I'll send all the mic positions as separate tracks, in addition to sending them mixed to my taste. Even as I say this, I'm having to sort of suppress the producer ego, the part of me that wouldn't want to let just anybody see under the hood of this engine I've built from scratch. But really, it's because I haven't seen all that many engines, so I don't know if mine is any good. And I'm afraid that if people can see under the hood of an otherwise functional car, they might be able to connect the dots and realize I'm something of a hack. Really, this is a great exercise for this very reason. I'm sharing some of my work, warts and all, though just a little of it, with someone I can trust. So I guess if there's a moral to the story, it's this, that music is a social endeavor, and it's easy to forget that when we're off in our own studios working on our own stuff separately. But it's good to reach out and connect with others, to work together on projects for a number of reasons. Whether it's because each opportunity to improvise is a workout for my improvisation muscles, or because someone else's need for violin tracks is a far better motivator, for me at least, to practice than my own love of playing my violin in the midst of late-stage capitalism and the constant need to trade my time and labor for whatever is going to do the best job of paying my bills, within some bounds, of course. I'm getting a lot out of working with HILLE, and I'm looking forward to sharing the final product with you when it comes out. We have reached the end of this episode, so it's now time for me to ask if you have enjoyed this or found it useful. Please give it a subscribe, a like, a comment, a 5-star rating, whatever the case may be, whether you are watching on YouTube at Noah Tichy Audio or listening on your podcast streaming platform of choice to Sounds Good. All of that stuff is really appreciated. It lets me know that you're enjoying the stuff, that I should make more of this stuff. So be sure to make your voice heard in that capacity. Thanks so much for spending this time with me. My name's Noah. See you next time.